Hello, thank you for joining us. This is the Friendly Reminder podcast. It's your weekly friendly reminder of what's going on around the world, in our lives, and everything in between. My name is Gus, and I'll be your host once again. It is August the 28th, and as always, I do have my two dear friends with me. Daniel, let's start with you. How are you today?
Good, Gus. How are you doing?
Pretty good. I mean, it's been a bit of a somber week. We're going to talk about it, but other than that, all things considered, doing pretty well.
It's only a somber week if you weren't watching the RNC, because if you're watching the RNC, then COVID was over, the economy was doing great, everything was great, nobody was socially distancing. America had turned around.
Yeah, except everything's on fire, too. All cities, all Democratic-run cities on fire.
The best is here already.
But the best is yet to come. And we'll get to that. But as you may have heard him, joining us today is Sam. How are you today, Sam?
I'm doing pretty good, considering. Anxious to get going.
Likewise. And I'm happy to have both of you today here again to get started. And yeah, as we mentioned, we are going to talk about the Republican convention. It was going to be our first topic. But as I'm sure many of you have heard by now, there's been a couple of events that have occurred in the city of Kenosha, Wisconsin. I'm going to try to go over the details real quick, just try to lay out some of the events that went down as best as I can. If you guys want to feel free to correct me, if you guys want to correct me, please feel free. But on Sunday afternoon, I believe, there was some sort of dispute where an individual, Mr. Jacob Blake, was involved with, which did warrant apparently the cops showing up to intervene in the dispute. This was caught on film. It was caught on camera. Based on what we can see, the police officers were, I mean, I don't know what the word is, not interrogating, but they were confronting Mr. Blake.
They would probably call it like a Terry stop. They had sort of stopped him, and they were for like a periodic, a temporary detention kind of thing.
Yeah, and on camera, he can be seen that he's walking away from the policeman. He opens the door to his vehicle. Apparently, inside of the vehicle were 3 of his children, I believe. And for whatever reason, during that, he gets grabbed by a police officer, and shortly thereafter, he was shot in the back, I believe 7 times, which led him to be, at least at the moment, he is hospitalized. He is alive, but he is hospitalized, and according to his father, paralyzed from the waist down. It is unknown, I believe, if it's permanent or temporary. So the footage came out. Obviously, I have not seen the full details of the footage. I'm not going to. I don't think I need to watch it to go over the details. But obviously, the footage came out, and it did lead to quite a bit of unrest in the city, very similar to what we've seen happen in Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, in Chicago, other cities across America. Some peaceful protesting. Others, not as peaceful. Quite a bit of unrest going on. And I believe, unfortunately, on Wednesday morning, like early Wednesday morning, Tuesday night, there was another incident involving a 17-year-old man who was armed with an AR-15. He was involved with some protesters for whatever reason, which led to him shooting a protester and unfortunately killing the protester, which of course
he killed two protesters.
Killed 2 protesters.
And they injured another one. Yeah.
Okay, so 2 dead and 1 injured. Again, this is a 17-year-old man. He did not, obviously because of his age, could not legally carry the rifle that he had. The curious part about this is that he was not detained on the spot. He actually walked away from the scene, got in his car, drove back home, which is actually across state lines to Illinois, where hours later, maybe the next day, he finally was approached by cops and did turn himself in when the cops actually went to his home. There's footage of this as well, and there's clear footage of him walking away with his arms up, basically trying to give himself up to the cops, knowing he just killed several men, and vehicles, like several vehicles, police vehicles, driving past him and cops walking past him, and they did not detain him until
and
several.
The protesters pursuing him were yelling out, "That guy just shot a bunch of people!"
Yeah.
And like the cops were, or the emergency first responders there were responding to the injured people, but they kind of just let the guy with the assault rifle walk past them, even though everybody was like, "That guy did it."
Yeah,
it's quite a thing to see on the video.
Yeah, so we get a very shocking contrast, juxtaposition of a black unarmed, from what we can tell now. There is a report stating that perhaps he had a knife, or there was a knife inside the car, or he might have had a knife on hand. Really, the reporting or the eyewitnesses have obviously, in regards to situations like this, have been kind of all over the place. But
so from the video, again, it's a video. It does not look like he has anything in his hand. It also looks like the cop is saying, drop the knife, even though it does not look like he has anything in his hand. So I'm not really sure what's going on. I don't even know if there's sort of an official account of what's going on yet.
There is an official account.
Is it that he was reaching for a knife?
Well, it actually just came out today, and it's a police report that came out today. They did say that, one, they were responding to a possible known warrant on Mr. Blake, and that he did have a knife, and they were aware. I believe the actual report says that they were aware of him having a knife
in the car.
Yes.
So he said, "I have a knife in the car." I mean, it's I don't know. It sounds a little. It sounds a little. Did he tell them he had a knife in the car and he was like, "I'm gonna go get it and stab you"?
We don't know.
I don't know.
Clear. Like, according to the reports, he did tell the police officers that he did have a knife in his possession. Yeah. Whether that was on hand or in the car, that's unclear.
Well, so the worst case scenario for him. Well, let's go with the scenario that he had a knife. It's still an utter failure of the cops to de-escalate the situation. No. To basically grab a guy as he's entering a car and shooting him 7 times in the back. That's the best way you have to de-escalate. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's really, I think, the main thing. But based on all things considered, it was a failure by cops to properly de-escalate the situation. It did. Again, I'm not an investigator, but there's no clear indication. Most people have claimed that there's no real clear indication for Mr. Blake to be shot several times and to be paralyzed right now. And in contrast, there's probably quite a bit of evidence to suggest that I should mention the shooter's name. It's Kyle Rittenhouse, 17-year-old shooter. Plenty of evidence right on hand that he should have been detained on the spot.
He should have. I think he definitely should have.
Yeah.
So I've watched as many of the videos, and so I'm gonna distinguish between sort of what maybe what this, they've charged him with a couple of different things. Most of them are unintentional, but I think one of them is intentional, sort of premeditated murder. Premeditated doesn't mean sort of planned for days and days. It just means you fired the weapon with the intent to kill, and you had that intent, and then you killed someone. That's what premeditated typically means. So what happened in this video, in the series of videos that I'm able to see, is that there was some sort of confrontation, and you do see videos of this kid. He's with the militia group, came across state lines. He is behaving as if he is a cop in a lot of ways in these videos. He's telling people who are recording him to sort of move along from the area. Like he's behaving as a cop. So there's a question of how this confrontation started, because as you may know, if he started the confrontation, whatever that may mean, when it gets in front of a jury, if he started the confrontation, he's not able to really claim self-defense. You can't start a fight and then end the fight by shooting the other person and claim self-defense. That's going to be a big question in this case, because the guy that he shot was unarmed, and in the video he threw something which a lot of the conservative websites were saying was a Molotov cocktail, but according to the police report, it was a plastic bag. The guy threw a plastic bag on him and they were chasing him. Again, we have no idea what the confrontation was prior to that. Was he, acting as a cop and telling them to move along? Was he, what happened before then to provoke the confrontation? He turns around. The guy behind him is not armed. Shoots the guy in the head. I think that's the one that they're calling intentional. Maybe not. But, at very best, against that guy, he has a claim of imperfect self-defense because he thought, he might have been in danger. But again, the guy was unarmed. He didn't have a Molotov cocktail. He didn't have a deadly weapon of any kind.
Well, I did not mean to interrupt there, but I agree with you. But it's the interesting contrast to me is essentially how the police department has reacted to this.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
So, they blame the protesters. They're like, well, the protesters were breaking curfews, so, some of them got murdered. It happens. That's not exactly what they said, but that's kind of how it came off in the press conference.
Right. And I'm going to read a quote here from the police chief of Kenosha in regards to, he was being questioned in regards to the incident with Mr. What's his name? Mr. Rittenhouse. And the exact quote is, "Everybody involved was out after the curfew. If the persons had not been in violation of that, perhaps the situation that unfolded would not have happened." So again, blaming protesters for being after curfew. Last night, a 17-year-old individual was involved in the use of firearms to resolve whatever conflict was in place. That's very specific language to essentially describe somebody shooting and killing two.
It's strange. I think what he is trying to do is he's trying to inject as much. I think they don't want this kid to be charged, is what I actually think, because they.
The police, right?
Well, I also think the people who brought the charges think that they may have overcharged him, and they think he's going to get acquitted for that. It's possible. I mean, again, he's 17. He's a straight-laced kid. And again, these factors should not matter, but they are going to matter in front of a jury. Yeah. He was in a neighborhood, in a dangerous part of town, really where he should not have been, with a gun. I mean, It sounds absurd, behaving as if he was a cop and provoked some sort of confrontation, or, maybe he didn't. There's also the question of, is holding that gun in violation of the law in and of itself very provocative? That is a good question.
Yeah.
I do want to say that at the other murder, or the other killing, sorry, is, they were chasing him down, and several protesters were chasing him. Several more joined when they said that guy shot someone, and they all started chasing him and trying to disarm him. And he turned around and he fired on several of them, including one of them that was pursuing him and then put his arms up, and he still fired at him. Yeah. He didn't hit that guy. I believe he hit another guy, killed him, and hit another guy in the arm, who were, again, trying to disarm him. And a lot of the conservative talking points about this, I think it's going to be, it was, while he was trying to defend himself, because they saw, but it doesn't make any sense, because, since when does a shooter, somebody who just killed someone, have any right to defend themselves against people trying to stop, detain, and disarm them? It would literally give him the right, under that logic, it would give him the right to just sort of kill everybody who was trying to detain him on his way to the turn himself into the police, like just murder
Right.
everybody. It's, that's not. Yeah, that's the legal argument. The moral argument is a little simpler, which is like, what the hell was this person thinking? What the hell kind of culture is created where this person thought it would be a smart move, a sort of helpful move to go police property with a deadly weapon in a state that is not his own without any sort of training. I mean, it's just ludicrous. That in and of itself is pretty reckless. So, so I, the moral case I think is very simple. The people defending him from a moral perspective are ridiculous.
Yeah,
The legal case might be a little fuzzier, but
right. And I also think there's the social case, right? Because like I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert in regards to the law and the judicial system, but I think the very basic thing that we would want ideally is for both Mr. Rittenhouse and Mr. Blake to go through that due process. Right. I'm not saying that due process is going to be perfect in its own right, but we need to get to that first step. And I think that's this specific series of events highlight the issue in America today, where we have failed to get people their right to due process based on certain criteria, right? So in this regard, it did not lead to the death of Mr. Blake, thankfully, but he did not provoke getting shot in the back and being paralyzed.
Mm-hmm.
He deserves. I don't know his history. I don't know all the details about that altercation he was particularly in. Whether it warranted him being approached by the cops during that time, but at the very least, he deserves some sort of due process, and he did not deserve to end up in the hospital paralyzed from the waist down with 7 wounds in his back. Likewise, even though I think Mr. Rittenhouse should have been detained right away, I'm glad he got detained, right? Like, I'm glad he's in custody and we can go through that due process. I'm not here to essentially just, I mean, I think he was, it sounds like he was being completely reckless, but I do not think I need to intervene and say he deserves this, and that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why we have a court system for that. But if we as a society can't even get those 2 individuals in the same place, which is allow them that same due process, then we're not functioning as a society, as an equitable society. And I think that's the main point here. Like, every time I see this happen, it's 2 things. One, we want to go into like defending somebody and saying, oh, it was self-defense, it was this and that. They don't deserve to be detained or be arrested or be in jail. And on the other end, it's like, oh, well, what did he do to deserve this? Or what did he do to be paralyzed or to be dead? And it's like to the people that jump to those kind of
he counterfeited a $20 bill.
Yeah,
so he deserved to be, summarily executed. I don't want to make light of the situation. It's horrifying, but that's the kind of trade-off we're talking about. The people who are going, yeah, well, he resisted. Some of these cases, it's literally like they're resisting arrest in the most nonviolent way possible. In this case, I don't know all the circumstances, but he was walking away. He was not fighting back or anything, or lunging at them, and it just seemed like a serious improper use of force by the cop, and one that I think that hand in hand with what we're talking about, due process, it's the kind of thing where people are like, well, why are the cities burning? It's like, well, because people are not being treated fairly. And when you don't have when cops get away with this kind of stuff, people are pissed off, and that's why things are burning down. It's not rocket science.
Right.
I think they're being pretty clear about it too. So it's a wonder that people are sort of confused about this point.
Right. I mean, I think
I don't think it's that they're confused. It's just they don't accept it. They don't think it's an issue.
Yeah, I mean, and I think for a lot of people, it's because it's not necessarily an issue to them. You hear the outcry for order, right? Like, and we're going to talk about the Republican convention, but you heard it all over the place there. It doesn't have to be from extremists either. You hear it from moderate lanes as well. That first and foremost, what we want is order, and then we can go from there. But the thing is that
I mean, you're hearing it from Joe Biden and Kamala too,
Yeah.
condemning violence, looting, that kind of thing. So
yeah, but I think if we're going to talk about order, it cuts several ways, right? Like order isn't just not having riots in the street; it's also making sure that we don't have vigilantes, 17-year-old vigilantes, like taking justice into their own hands and taking away the lives of individuals without any remorse, or at least without any even training or anything to even warrant them being there. And likewise, order is not people, because of the color of their skin, being afraid of law enforcement, being afraid to call them when they need help, and it's certainly not order when somebody can't get their due process because cops decide to be judge, jury, and executioner right on the spot. None of that is order. So it can't just stop and end at the protest or the riots or any kind of looting going on. If you truly care about order, you want all of these things in place and equitable for everybody. But I don't hear that. I just hear it with the riots, and I just hear it with the protests, and I just hear it with the looting, which I'm not pro rioting, or I'm not pro looting, and I don't want small businesses to have property damage. But if we're truly concerned about order for all, then we need to address every single systemic issue. Right now, this is a very evident issue with systemic racism when it comes to policing. I mean, you just saw it, right? You saw it with an unarmed black man ending up in the hospital, and a white man that killed two individuals getting to go home and be there for several hours. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What else is that but systemic racism? What else is that but profiling leading to cops aggressively attacking one man and letting another man go, even though he's walking away with a rifle?
And people are saying he just killed someone.
Yeah.
Or he just yelling out that he just shot someone.
Yeah. So it's a very it's a very unfortunate story, and to me it's almost like it's I don't want to use light terms, but my apologies, but it feels like a Voltron of just horrible things that have been going on. Like you talk about obviously gun violence, which is an issue that we haven't touched upon in a couple of months because of the pandemic, but it's very, very huge issue here in America. We talk about right-wing extremism. Something you mentioned it briefly, Daniel, but we didn't cover it at large. Is that this man, Mr. Rittenhouse, does claim to be part of a militia, most likely of right-wing establishment. So,
he's a Trump supporter. He was at a Trump rally in the front row, I think, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to let you speak, Sam, but let me just finish my thought here. So right-wing extremism leading to terrorism, essentially. This has not been the first case. If let's allow due process to do its thing, but we've seen examples of right-wing terrorism affecting it. We've seen it in El Paso. We've seen it in Parkland. Obviously, when it comes to the protests and the riots, and when it comes to the racial injustice, these were all topics that just reared their ugly heads really in a matter of 3-4 days. I'm really sorry, Sam. What were you going to say?
That's okay. It's just when you say man, like he's a man carrying an assault rifle, he wasn't even like legally a man, I mean, he wasn't even legally allowed to carry this rifle,
Mm-hmm. He wasn't, and he wasn't. But I also don't want to the last thing I want to do is oh, this kid,
it's a little dismissive. I mean, he was stalking down a city street with an assault rifle in his hands.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, I would not want to be talking about this. And I keep previewing this. We're going to talk about the convention, but I'm also very at at the very least right now, very hesitant to just put on my like political strategist hat and be like, well, how is this going to affect Joe Biden's chances for the presidency? I don't know. Like this has not been the first time that there's been social unrest, and it's been okay for at least his polling numbers. But I really struggle to care that much when the issue here is not just electing a moderate Democrat. It's constant evidence or constant examples that there needs to be deep systemic reform and a lot of aspects of our judicial system. And I don't want to tell people not to protest because I'm afraid that my politician is not going to get elected.
It is a little silly to be like, well, we need to elect Joe Biden, so probably don't protest this
to solve
thing because,
racism and policing.
because you might alienate someone. It's like, I don't think the people who are doing the protesting give a fuck about Joe Biden's political strategy. And why should they? A lot of them feel shortchanged by the system, and they feel like this is a way to get people to pay attention and listen to them. We talked a little bit about how amusing is that the right word? How ridiculous it is that Republicans will go on and on about how peaceful protest, but then they'll turn around and any kind of peaceful protest is also an affront to the system. Colin Kaepernick is an affront to the system in their view. The NBA walkout is the NBA strike, and WNBA, and I think it's an MLB strike too, but you can clarify if that's not accurate.
I think some teams did, in the NHL too.
Yeah, they're being like, oh, those rich athletes. It's amazing that they're like, well, you got to protest peacefully, and it's like, well, that never works. So it's sort of like, and a few days ago, I shared with you the list of reforms that have been passed since the George Floyd demonstration started, and it's pretty substantial. And this is not perfect. This is not nearly enough. This is not the systemic reform that's necessary, but to look at a list of a lot of reforms that cities are considering in the wake of this and then being like, well, this doesn't work. It's like, well, actually, empirically, it does seem to be working in some ways. Maybe somebody could do a study a little bit and see how the kind of rioting and things like that led to changes. I know that I think the turmoil in the 60s is often blamed for Nixon's victory, but it's also directly led to a lot of civil rights legislation. So,
like we talked about, like many times in this episode, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah. It all came to front in the context of a lot of what Trump today calls race riots or whatever. That's what they were called back then. You learn about the civil rights movement in school, and often it's like, well, MLK was there, and then he nonviolently led people to. But it ignores that there was something like a mini civil war going on in the 60s in American cities. There was a lot of unrest. There was a lot of rioting, and it was written off as this is the word they used. We don't really use it today, but it was written off as, well, the Negro crime problem, and today we call it the civil rights movement. So I think it's contextualizing this stuff is important, because I think how easy it is to sort of get obsessed in the moment to moment of these protests and being like, well, is this past the line? Is this too much? It sort of ignores the forest for the trees, in my opinion, which is, we spend so much time litigating every aspect of this protest that we can't really talk about the point of the whole protest, which is,
change,
reform of police, reform of American policing.
I mean, there's they say it, right? No justice, no peace. They're not saying no peace ever. They're saying no justice, no peace. And that's important, because when we or at least in my experience, and on Twitter and on several editorials that I've come across, when we talk about how this might damage Joe Biden's chances, or when we talk about how this might not lead to some incremental reform here and there, we do it in the context that whatever order we have right now, it's worked for us, or it's worked for the individuals that point these things out. But the problem is that this isn't even a Trump thing for a lot of the people protesting. This has been something that has been going on for generations. And the order that all these individuals, all these pundits, all these editorials that are out there that they mention, that order did not work for them. It never has. For them, that order is being afraid of calling the cops because the cops might come in and shoot them. For them, that order is, maybe finding yourself on the wrong side of the law, but ending up dead rather than ending up through some sort of judicial process. For them, that order is going out jogging and getting shot by somebody who is not even a cop. It's just some civilian who just decided to bring justice to his own hands.
Wasn't he an ex-cop?
Yeah. Whatever it is, he's not an on-duty cop or
No, he was a guy who decided to play cop.
Yeah, or this man kid, whatever you want to call him, just deciding to go into this protest with an AR-15 and resulting with 2 people dead. That is not order, not for them. It shouldn't. And if we would just to place ourselves in their shoes, we would understand that right away. But we don't do it. We just want the order that we recognize, which is being able to commute to work, being able to walk into Starbucks and get our favorite coffee, and being able to live our lives as normal. But that's privilege. That's not justice. Anything else you guys want to share regarding this?
Yeah, in the context of the convention, which
Yeah, and we're going to get to
the
that.
gun couple. The gun couple.
Yeah. So our next topic is the Republican convention. We talked about the Democratic convention last week, so it's only fair we were going to talk about this as our main topic, but obviously important things came up. But we do want to cover this, and we're gonna try to cover everything. The good, and then by the good, we're probably just going to try to discuss what we think actually worked for the Republicans. The bad, but I want to start with the crazy because Daniel, last week, you had a great list of the top 5 most embarrassing moments in a convention. It was a great list, but I think you may have to completely revamp that list now because, as some would say, the best was yet to come.
The best was yet to come. Do you want to set the clip up, or should we just let her do the talking?
I do real quick because I just want to mention that on Monday night, I decided I wasn't going to watch it live. I was just going to go back and watch the speeches that everybody was praising or watch the speeches that everybody thought was bad. Just watch the highlights, essentially. I wasn't going to watch the whole thing. But I did. I couldn't resist temptation. I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to take a quick peek and see what's going on with our fellow Republicans here. And it was right in the middle of Kimberly Guilfoyle's. Is that how you pronounce her name?
I believe so, yeah.
Guilfoyle's speech, which she was just yelling off the top of her lungs. I was just like, oh, Jesus, ma'am, please. You don't need to shout.
It was live, right?
Yes. It was.
Or was it taped? Okay. So I guess if she was in that auditorium and there were people in there, it would have made sense to do that. Maybe.
I think there were just reporters there, but no, she was, and from our perspective as a viewer, it looked like an empty room. So it was just like, why are you yelling? It's an empty room.
It had a real creepy dystopian feel to
read
it.
the room. It's not hard. There's nobody there. Oh, but if you want to play the clip, Daniel.
All right, she's in front of just way too many American flags. All of them very wrinkly for some reason.
Ladies and gentlemen, leaders and fighters for freedom and liberty and the American dream, the best is yet
She's just standing
come.
there with her hands up in the air. What people get so caught up in the yelling. What the fuck does that even mean? Ladies and gentlemen, lovers and fighters and freedom fighters, the best is yet to come. What? What in the world does that mean?
When you guys first told me about this, I thought, like, from my understanding, I thought she was just going to say it throughout the entire speech. Like, she would just kept saying the best is yet to come, like, throughout the entire speech, but it was just one time.
Yeah,
But-
no, it was one time, but it was one hell of a time.
Yeah.
You know, I want to say that most conservative speeches hurt my ears, but this was the first one that did it literally. But yeah, that was a crazy speech. Not all of them were like that, but it wasn't the only one. There was, for whatever reason, they decided that a good guest to have on the speaking list or speakers list was the St. Louis couple, the gun couple. Do you know their names? Either Sam or Daniel?
The McQuack more. I don't know. I don't care. I don't respect them enough to call them by their correct names. I think it's the McCormicks.
Guns and Roses.
They set this up. One overarching thing about the RNC, which we have to get out at front, is that they took the lying, the propaganda, and they sharpened it to a fine point, and they've taken this propaganda machine that generates entire illusory worlds in people's heads, and they've made it a well-oiled, terrifying machine. So if you're not paying attention to some of this stuff and you just sort of tune into this, if you're not a big news person and you catch some of this, I mean, you would get an entirely inaccurate view of like the last 8 months of America. You would think
last 8 months, last 4 years.
Last 4 years for sure, but the last 8 months, because, you know, basically COVID is something that's in the past. They spoke about it in the past tense. You know, the very last event was a super spreader event because nobody had masks. Everybody was seated close together. There were thousands of, I believe 1,500 people. And I believe only the front row near Trump was tested, which I find hilarious, and nobody else was tested. In DC, a city that has been ravaged, it's kind of amazing, and that is, I really found myself when watching some of these speeches thinking, oh, they're gonna win, because they're getting much better at just sort of turning people's brains off when they're watching these speeches, because the lies come at you so quickly that you don't have time to sort of, or you know, if you don't have the wherewithal, like I was looking at some of these fact checks and I was like, these poor guys, like the number of things that were just false throughout the evening. And I don't know if you want me to go through any of those at some point, but
yeah, I mean, before we do, because I agree with you for the most part. I mean, I think in terms of like how effective can this be? I don't think the convention itself is going to end up being that particularly effective, but because you mentioned they perfected this, but I actually don't think they were the ones that perfected it. I think they just taken what Fox News has done and did it campaign style. They didn't need Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity. They were just going to implement their strategy of let's present and project a different world than what we're in, which is essentially what Fox News has been doing. I mean, that's why you get 40% to 45% of Americans still approving of an administration that has allowed over 180,000 Americans to die, and for our economy to still be in shambles, right? Like, I mean,
you had speeches with people going like 180,000 people dead, and you had people giving speeches like, these damn Democrats want us to all wear masks, and we're not going to listen to the experts. That's not what America is all about.
There were people saying coronavirus in past tense, as if we're not having 9/11s every 2 days, you know, in terms of death tolls. Like,
yes,
right now.
Yeah.
But I mean,
and there was a concerted effort to make it seem like, well, this was a thing that happened to us, you know,
right?
China
as
virus.
Opposed to, we have 4% of the world's population and 25% of the COVID deaths. the president keeps talking about how there's surges in Europe and it's always like a dozen cases, and we're losing 1,000 to 2,000 people a day. It's like they. But if you watch this convention, and I watched a large amount of it, some of it just in the background because it was very dull. If you buy into it, it's very easy to get trapped in this bubble of information where you're just receiving, and again, all politicians bend the truth. I don't think there's a comparison in recent history to the litany of just false information that comes out of this administration.
Yeah, I think they make the Bush administration blush.
I mean, they pinned Joe Biden with the Green New. I'm just going to read. Can I just quickly list off a litany of lies so we don't have to keep coming back to this? Like, so much lying. They pinned Joe Biden to saying AOC was going to craft his environmental policies, saying he had the Green New Deal. That is absurd. Like, that is absurd. They talked about how he donated his paycheck, which is true. He does donate his paycheck, but what they neglected to say is that he makes millions and millions of dollars every year through his private business, because unlike every other president, he didn't disinvest from his private business. He says that he keeps his hands out of it by saying he doesn't interact with his sons who run the business. His sons, the two guys that spoke at the RNC,
Yeah.
he supposedly doesn't interact with them, and they don't enter politics. So it's like a blind trust kind of system, which, by the way, that's not even a blind trust, because if your family is running it, it's not blind. They repeatedly said he had the largest tax cut in history. It was like the 15th biggest. They said that there was a recession when he came into office. Absolutely false. Obama had more job creation than he did even before the coronavirus. Do you have any that stuck out as just very, very obviously false? They said, oh God, some of them were so obviously appalling. Somebody said that Trump achieved peace in the Middle East.
Yeah,
They said repeatedly that he ended wars. What wars did he end? And then they also said that he didn't start any wars. And then Pompeo came on and was just talking about how they had already started a war with Iran, like a secret war with Iran. It's just appalling. I don't know what wars he stopped. He's escalated every war that's ongoing right now. They paid like lip service to ending endless war, but I mean, clearly they have no interest in actually doing that. They're massively boosting military spending. Of course, Biden is a socialist. Biden has pledged to defund the police. Biden is a Marxist. Biden is secretly Bernie Sanders in a mask. What else did they say that was false about Joe? Completely false about Joe Biden.
That he couldn't. It was something about he couldn't light his own state, or something about California having a power outage because of. And he said I think this is when the DNC, Biden said, "I am the light."
Oh.
And he said what?
And then Trump and all the other people that I saw were like, "You can't even they can't even keep California."
Can't even keep the light on.
Yeah.
Oh, I got one that's repeated at nauseum at every Republican thing. Joe Biden supports taxpayer-funded abortion right up to the moment of birth. Absolutely false. He supports general limitations up to the first 20 to 24 weeks is what Biden currently supports.
Yeah, they also mentioned that they added 9 million jobs in the last 3 months, not taking into consideration that we lost like 30 million jobs or 40 million jobs in the last couple of months before that. So it was just jobs that were regained after the pandemic took its toll.
They claim NATO is Donald Trump is doing a grand bargain, and he's got NATO to pay more, which is false. I mean, he has gotten them to pay more, but they've been paying more before Trump was in office too. The very fine comment, they said that that's a lie, even though it happened. Very fine people comment.
He got out of the bad Iran deal.
That was great, yeah. He got out of that bad, but I mean that's not a lie because he did get out of the deal. I guess calling it a bad deal.
It's not bad, yeah.
Well, yeah. Now he's freed up Iran to achieve nuclear weapons.
It was in his speech, which we're gonna get to, but also like the embassy in Jerusalem costing less than $500,000 to open. When
21 million, I believe. Yeah,
million to open. Yeah, I mean, the lies were.
Oh, Pence strongly implied that David Patrick Underwood was a DHS officer that was shot. He strongly implied that he was shot by Black Lives Matter people. He was actually shot by a white supremacist member of the Boogaloo movement, and he mentioned it, in the same breath as the protests in order to draw some sort of comparison. Which is, I mean, obviously he was trying to get people to think that a leftist had killed a guy when it was actually a right-wing guy.
Yeah.
Biden has said he doesn't want to cut funding for law enforcement, unfortunately, as much as we would like him to.
Yeah,
They said Joe Biden was against fracking. I mean, that's the problem with trying to fact check. You could go on for hours. Honestly, you could go on for hours because they paint a completely illusory picture of the world. And that's why I think that they have a good chance of winning. They're just very skilled at it.
When I was watching the Trump speech, I wish they could just stop every time he said a lie and just said that was a lie. But then the speech would have lasted 10 hours or 15 hours or something.
Yeah, and it was already incredibly long.
Yeah.
But do you guys want to talk about individual speakers?
I can mention that if you want me to list speakers that I actually think are effective, I felt like Tim Scott was that
definitely
was the better one, probably the best speech of the entire convention.
Agree.
He and I don't want to sound like I don't want to get canceled here because I'm just going to sound like I'm just comparing them because they're both black men. But the Republicans and the right have always tried to kind of find their own Obama, and that there's been people like Bobby Jindal and Marco Rubio that have briefly received that label. This was honestly the closest Republican speaker that I've come across where I felt like he was genuinely a very strong speaker. It was not like he was just better than trash, which is usually what I hear from no offense to Republicans, but they don't have a lot of great speakers. He was just generally very, very effective. And if he was the vice president, I would honestly be a lot more worried than compared to Pence. I thought Nikki Haley, she got praised a lot. I thought she was fine. I thought she was kind of boring, but
she was very robotic.
Yeah,
honestly. And Nikki Haley offended me. This might get me canceled, but she was extremely robotic. And from the same people that say Kamala is robotic, at least when you look at Kamala, she seems like a person, like a normal person. When I look at Nikki Haley, I see a very scared, sort of frozen Indian woman, sort of in a white person's body. It's very unnerving because she is Indian. She goes by Nikki Haley, and that was what kind of offended me a little bit about the speech. Is she talked about how America is not a racist country. I should know. When my parents came here, they were treated poorly because of the turban they wore. That was her example of how America is not a racist country. I mean, it's not. I understand that she meant it's not in its essence a racist country, but why? That was such a poor example. Why did you even bring it up? Why didn't you bring up something else where someone was nice to your family? It was just a strange speech. I found it very robotic. I don't understand the people saying she's like the future of the Republican Party. Was she in the primary this last time with Trump?
No, she's never. I believe she's never ran for president. Not in any previous primary either. A lot of people.
Well, she's obviously going to, and I think that she does not. I mean, she's just not an impressive individual. I find it just in terms of, you've heard my criticisms of Kamala. I think Kamala is a much more impressive, just personal individual when she's out there talking than Nikki Haley, who I find very kind of creepy. The sort of empty look in her eyes, kind of creepy. But let's see, Kayla McInerney, and I'm sorry this just turns into us like kind of spitballing on the random stuff we remember, but did a very, very again, part of the whole dishonesty thing. And the thing that a lot of the speakers did was just tell sort of a personal story of the time, like Kayla McInerney, she had like a pre-existing condition, which she actually said it was a pre-existing condition. And the whole point of the speech was that Trump like called her to check on how she was doing.
But that was it,
You know,
right?
yeah, it was just like that's it.
Donald
But
Trump
she used the
called
word
me.
yeah, and she used the word pre-existing condition, I guess, as like a buzzword to be like, yeah, Trump wants to protect pre-existing conditions, which is another absolute fabulation on the part of the Republicans. They've been trying to do nothing but gut this thing in the courts and via legislation. But her story again. Ivanka told a story about how like her grandson built a Lego White House and Trump put it in the Oval Office, and it's like. So the story is about how this guy is nice to his grandkids. It's very strange that the people who are telling like the nice warm stories about Trump tell these stories that are like he showed me like the normal amount of human decency, like the normal human amount of decency.
I
Let's see,
remember this other speech. I don't know who it was, but she was in prison, and Trump released her.
Actually, that other than Tim Scott, I thought that was one of the more effective speeches because he did try to do this like double, and that is one of the people who I think was probably one of the only sincere people up there who actually wanted to help Trump win because he literally let her out of jail.
Just to mention, I believe you're referring to Alice Johnson. Right. She was freed, or she was granted clemency by Donald Trump. Actually, Kim Kardashian advocated for her release, which is what.
Really?
Yeah. That's what basically convinced Donald Trump to grant clemency, and she was invited to speak. And I agree with the both of you. I think that was one of the better speeches. Probably those two, the Tim Scott and the Alice Johnson speeches, were
the most effective.
Yeah, which that's kind of where I land. Like, and this is just my general thoughts. My apologies for moving away from individual speeches, but I want to say it because I have an obvious blind spot when it comes to this. The best thing I can is sit and ponder, like put on my pundit hat and ponder how this is going to reach moderates in the Midwest or in Florida or in Arizona, and it's almost futile because how am I going to know? I'm deep into my echo chamber, very leftist / liberal echo chamber that I check on every day to give myself anxiety. Like I don't know what kind of media these voters are consuming or this electorate is consuming, and how this is going to be met, because I don't know how much these speeches are going to get highlighted. I think you're going to see the Mike Pence speech more, and the Donald Trump speech definitely more, and the Donald Trump Jr. speech more, and the Ivanka Trump speech more. And I don't know if any of those speeches were landed as efficiently as these two. And I don't know how much the Republican Party, the Trump campaign, and the media is going to focus on them, if that makes sense.
I suppose it depends. Okay, like who is he trying to appeal to? He's trying to scare the shit out of people. For the most part, he's trying to, but he's also trying to say, "I'm not a racist," right? That's what he's saying. He's like, "I'm going to protect you from the mean people, but also I'm not a racist, and you can feel comfortable voting for me." As a whole, although I think there were rough speeches, I think he got that message across. It is a little contradictory because some of it was literally like one person saying he wants to fill the jails up and another person saying he wants to let everybody out of jail, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I would say that I think they did a little bit, and I think they did it, and again, complete false propaganda. I think they did a little bit more, a little better at than Democrats at pushing the point home on a lot of those issues. Again, that the great suburban, having the McCloskeys up there and being like, oh, they're coming for your suburbs and they're going to destroy them, and showing an absolutely fake video, not fake, but a false video of people tearing down the fence and coming into their gated community, when the actual video shows people walking into their fence and crossing their yard. Not crossing their yard, just crossing the sidewalk in front of their house. But the point I'm making is it's not designed to reach us, right? Is it appealing to the people that it's supposed to? Maybe. I mean, Wisconsin,
Right.
Kenosha's in Wisconsin. This unrest is, and we talked about the political realities of it. And when we were talking about the issue itself, we said, well, maybe the political realities don't matter that much. And now that we're actually talking about the political stuff, maybe, I mean, it's the question though, the funny issue is, do they do a good enough job of painting this as somehow a leftist problem and not a problem of Trump himself? And I think we've talked about this on the show, that if Biden is elected, to a certain extent, a lot of these protests will stop. And it's not as like an insult to the protesters, but you're sort of losing that sort of
The boogeyman.
The thing
the
that holds
boogeyman.
together.
Exactly. And I'm not saying that the protests will stop completely. I mean, under Obama, you had Ferguson, but I think that it's funny that the assumption is this unrest will help Trump, when I think the idea that, hey, if there's not somebody inflaming these tensions, is it really going to be worse? It's probably going to be a lot better.
Sam, like, what you watched, what do you think did anything stand out to you?
He's trying to say, I'm not a racist, but I'll still hurt the people that are mean to you. He's trying to say that he's trying to say that he's just basically the good guy. He's gonna be there and through thick and thin. He's not gonna, run and scamper, when actually that's all he does.
Donald Trump Jr. literally said something like, "Don't you want the good guys to win again?"
Yeah. Yeah, that Trump Jr. speech, I'm telling you, it's like that. It's that Talking Heads song where it's like, you may find yourself behind a large automobile in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife. I think he literally said that. Like, imagine imagine that house, you could have it, or imagine that wife, you could have it. I don't think he said anything about the wife, but that job,
no,
you could have it.
I think he actually did say something about having a wife.
Yeah,
something
strange.
I didn't watch, but I didn't really want to.
But I think, just to say my general thoughts about it, I don't entirely disagree with you, Daniel, and I think, Sam, you also kind of mentioned that point, which I don't 100% disagree with it. There were some things that he did do to essentially say, I'm not a racist. I think the whole citizenship, like the naturalization of immigrants, that whole, which I find it insulting, but I think that whole shtick, to me, it didn't read as an overture to immigrants or to people of color or to first generation Americans. It felt like it was targeted towards white suburban voters that might feel shame for voting for Donald Trump because he might be a racist. And
again, just the minimum shit, like he's doing a naturalization ceremony. Oh my god, that's so impressive. You're doing the thing that happens every day in this country. Just the very minimal thing.
But in terms of like my thoughts, and again, I'm coming from this very blind spot perspective, but I'm going to just compare the Democratic convention and the Republican convention. And I feel like in terms of effectiveness, they both ended up in the same place. They did it different ways. I don't think Democrats were particularly focused on policy at large. They were focused on a coalition, and they were focused on very much making Joe Biden seem like the most decent human being you'll ever come across, a person that has grieved unlike anybody else has, and understands loss and understands pain, and can shepherd this country through this very dark time. Whereas I think the Republicans, they were focused not necessarily on specific policy, but they were focused on using, the Democrats are run by the left. They're going to allow the streets to burn, and if you let them win, we're going to lose America as we know it. Which is, the same hope versus fear thing that we've always kind of pitted against each other the last couple of years. But I don't think either one of them did that much better than the other. I think if at the end of the day, if you were a strategist in both campaigns, you're relieved because there was a lot of questions going into these conventions and how they're going to be perceived and how they're going to end up and how if they're going to be able to pull it off. And I think both parties did. But B, you're probably going to be a little disappointed that the other side didn't screw it up either. They did it practically as well. So I felt it was basically a wash until the Trump speech, where that speech was bad.
Yeah,
I thought it was very, very bad. Yeah.
And I'm going to say, I want to make sure I say, it was not bad in my view. Like, I'm not saying it was bad because of the horrible things he said or because of the lies or because of the misleading part. It was delivered poorly. It was written poorly. It was edited poorly.
Did they write a second draft of it, or did they just kind of wing it and then just say, well, Trump will figure it out?
Most of all, like, he did a poor job. Donald Trump did a poor job. Like, he was, I don't know why they decided to make it an hour-long speech, but he couldn't get through it. Like, towards the last 10 minutes, if you look at that, like, he's done. He's as bored with that speech.
Sweating profusely throughout the entire speech.
And he was as bored with that speech as I felt I was bored listening to that speech. Like, he felt like he wanted to finish up that time where he just said, like, I accept your nomination, which is generally supposed to be kind of like the hurrah moment of the speech.
Oh, that's the only line I remember. I profoundly accept this nomination.
He was saying, I profoundly accept this nomination. Like, he was just like, just get me off stage. Like,
which again, he talks about Joe Biden not being able to pronounce words, and he fucked up the word proudly. Like, did he even read the speech ahead of time? Why would he say profoundly?
I don't know. That amazed me was when I heard that first sentence come out of his mouth. I didn't even understand it. I had to rewind it and make sure I listened to it correctly because I didn't understand it. It didn't make any sense.
He did fuck up a lot of words. He was straining at certain points, which is funny because they laugh at Joe Biden and say, all he does is read the teleprompter, and then Trump can't even read
do it properly. Like, I was just about to say, like, he sounded like what Republicans said Joe Biden was going to sound like.
Yes, that is a very good point. Yeah, he did.
So at that point, like, that was the main difference. I felt like from a production standpoint, from like the way every other speaker tried to do their job, I felt, again, I'm biased, so maybe that's the problem, but I felt like both conventions were like, it's a toss-up which one was better, until the fact that Joe Biden's speech, which we didn't cover last week because we recorded before it aired, pretty good speech. I'm not gonna, like, I saw a lot of, like, kind of what felt like hyperbole around it, around that speech. To me, it was good. He did what he had to do. It was 24 minutes. He sounded, quote unquote presidential. He did his job. This speech was dud. I mean, that's what I'm going to describe. I'm not going to. Yesterday, I felt like, this is the worst convention speech I've ever heard. But I'm going to tone that back now. That was probably like a knee-jerk reaction, but it was a dud. It was not a good speech, and it was not a good speech by Donald Trump standards, which is the main thing I want to emphasize. Like, that was one of the worst speeches I've heard him say.
It was the second longest inauguration speech in recent history, and the first one was his 2016 speech.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
That was the first.
This was mercifully like 30 minutes shorter than that speech. It was still an hour long.
I took some notes here. I don't know if you guys want to hear. Look how slowly he's walking down these steps. Is he okay? Because he was walking down the steps rather slowly. He said profoundly accept. That's a fuck up. Why does he think Joe Biden's brain is broken? Talking about China, God, they touted that China travel ban like it was the cure to everything. He's like, I banned China from coming here. Well, first of all, no, you let a lot of people in from China. And by the way, you took forever to ban Europe. And when you finally got around, which Europe is where it spread from, and when you finally got around to banning Europe, you accidentally banned European trade. I love telling that story. The one time Donald Trump accidentally banned European trade from the White House, and then they had to issue a statement saying Trump said that he was banning not people and he said people and cargo, and they had to issue a thing and said not cargo. He's not banning trade from Europe. Anyway, they talk about the China travel ban like it's the be all end all, and it's like, hey, motherfucker, do you know where we're banned from? The entire world. The United States is currently banned from the entire world. So it was a little rich them talking about the China ban for so long. He touched on monuments, which I was like, are you serious? Who the heck cares about monuments? It seemed, I wrote here, did they hit him with the tranquilizer dart before he walked out there?
A sleepy dart.
It was, sleepy.
About an hour and 10 minutes into the speech, I tuned back in and he was talking about Annie Oakley and covered wagons. And I was like, motherfucker, 180,000 people are dead. What in the fuck is going on? Oh, and the other great line, we pioneered the fatality rate. It was a fuck up, but very clever little line. Oh, he did talk about Middle East peace and an
which he accomplished.
Jared finished it up, and
yeah, it was very boring.
It was a
like,
bad
he just
speech.
brought up some stuff that I'm like, dude, this is not gonna resonate with anybody. Like, I'm not trying to minimize it, but when I heard like the pipeline XL, I was like, I have not even heard that since like pre 2016. It's again, I'm not saying it's not important or important, but it's just like we're as an electorate not even focused on that right now. Like, why are you bringing this up? Like, you could have taken 30 minutes off of that speech and it would have been widely stronger speech than it was.
Stronger. It needed a good 30 to 40 minutes cut out of that sucker. And
I mean, they could have made it 10 minutes and he could have gotten his point across more easily.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the strong parts, which there were not a whole lot. I actually, maybe that line, Sam, that you mentioned, where it's like he says he's the Nelly of the light, but he can't even keep the lights on. I was like, well, that was something, I guess. Like that was, but I mean, that was a speech devoid of moments, even though it was an hour long, which is not what you want when it's your main guy. So
you're inaugurated. And you're getting a bunch of people sick in order to do it.
Yeah, and you know
what? See
what?
that clip of Rudy Giuliani just sweating in the crowd and wiping his sweat on his wife or the person next to him? It was
really.
Well, he had like a little towel, right? Like he was.
Yeah.
I was watching it like twice the speed, so.
I thought the crowd thing was just a mistake because not only are you exposing people, and these stories might come out 2 to 3 weeks from now that positive cases came out of that speech, but honestly, that was a low energy crowd too. Like they were like politely clapping 30 minutes into that speech, like they were done. It reminded me of a wedding. That's the most, like it was like a wedding ceremony, and then there was like a groomsman giving a speech that's way too long. And
everybody's like,
because he's too drunk.
Yeah, because he's drunk. Yeah. Everyone's like, all right, wrap it up.
Yeah. But that's all I have to say. Again, I think we mentioned this last week. Conventions probably not that consequential when it comes to who's going to win the election or not. And I think that's very much the case with these two conventions. I think a week from now, we're not going to think about it. But what you mentioned, Daniel, about them being so good at lying, that will go on, right? Because they're going to continue those lies, and they're going to continue to be good at lying and good at getting away with it. So that may have consequences. Obviously, the unrest going on in cities in the Midwest will have consequences. But ultimately, I think I guess congrats to both campaigns for pulling off the first ever whatever virtual conventions until the Trump speech or the last
Right.
night
I was
where
gonna
they-
say
yeah, until,
that was just
again until the. But it was still, for the most part, coronavirus convention, for better or for worse.
How about I play you some clips of my favorite speeches?
Okay.
Only if you want to. If you think it's a waste of time, we don't have to.
No, we can end it on
Okay,
that
a few. Okay, here is the Don Jr. Let me set this clip up. All right. Imagine you're getting home late from work. You're falling asleep in front of the TV. You wake up. You see an infomercial with a sleazy looking guy. He's on a boat drinking a cocktail, surrounded by women in bikinis, and he's yelling at you about his new scheme.
Life you want to have. One with a great job, a beautiful home, a perfect family. You can have it. Imagine the country you want to live in. One with true equal opportunity, where hard work pays off and justice is served with compassion and without partiality. You can have it. Imagine a world where the evils of communism and radical Islamic terrorism are not given a chance to spread, where heroes are celebrated and the good guys win. You can have it. That is the life. That is the country. That is the world that Donald Trump and the Republican Party are after. And yes, you can have it. Because unlike Joe Biden and the radical left Democrats, our party is open to everyone. It starts by rejecting radicals who want to drag us into the dark and embracing the man who represents
bright and beautiful
future for all.
Yeah, my favorite part of that clip, besides the whole very, very strange, do you want a hot wife, a suburban house, a Jeep that uses way too much gas? You can have it if you dream it, is the part where he says the Republican Party is open to everyone, and we start by getting rid of the radicals.
Oh boy, yeah. This is not my beautiful wife. Yeah, that speech. But even then, maybe the best speech from the Trumps.
You thought so? I thought Ivanka's speech was probably the best.
Really? I thought she was boring.
Oh yeah, I mean, but
they were all bad. Let me start with that. Like this is a pick your poison type of solution or situation. But if you're Team Ivanka, man, that's fine by me.
I thought her speech was good. It was very generic. This is Kayla McInerney.
Coronavirus, and the president saying, look, we're not going to take people in from China right now. I mean, isn't it just a matter of protecting us, our national security really being at stake? And he's sort of the last line of defense there, or first line, I should say.
Absolutely. This president will always put America first. He will always protect American citizens. We will not see diseases like the coronavirus come here.
Yep.
We will not see terrorism come here.
Weird,
Isn't that refreshing?
They're like sorry, I'm just joking. That was from 6 months ago.
Yeah, you cut off the part that isn't that refreshing compared to Obama's awful presidency.
I apologize.
With the awful presidency.
That was
one word I can
Thank you
use
so
to
much.
describe everything that's going on right now. It's refreshing.
Refreshing, yeah. Trump is keeping us safe. There's one last clip I wanted to play from a friend of the pod, Rudy Giuliani.
Oh.
Frequent guest.
Actually, there might be two.
Trump, with his boundless love of our country and all our people, his disciplined work ethic, his exceptional ability to inspire, and his deep understanding of our system of government and the strength of American values is the man we can trust to preserve and even improve our way of life. Mr. President,
make it safe
make
again.
our nation safe again.
Which is a weird thing to say.
After 4 years of,
Yeah.
Also, it's funny that he's like, yeah, Trump is smart. He's handsome. He's articulate. Everybody knows these things.
He's
hardworking, slim.
Has the best diet.
Oh man. All right, one more Rudy clip.
These continuous riots in Democratic cities gives you a good view of the future under Biden.
I like that one.
Yeah,
the things that are happening right now under Trump give you a good view
just a preview
of the future.
And that's really, in essence, that kind of really summarizes the Republican convention. However, that is we're done with that topic, but that is also.
I'm sorry, I have to add this because this is appalling. Jim Acosta asked them about the lack of social distancing, and a White House official said, "quote Everybody is going to catch this thing eventually." So I guess that's it. Herd immunity, because that's what the White House official said.
Well, I mean, if they have a crowd there, that tells it all. Well, I'm just glad the convention season is over. The best is yet to come. Anyways, folks, we do have to end our show here. We do have to move on. Unfortunately, we don't have a third topic today because this lasted more than an hour. But we had a lot of things to cover, so I appreciate the folks listening to us today. Thank you so much for joining us. And I also appreciate Daniel, Sam, for joining me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
All right. And to our listeners, we'll see you next week for another Friendly Reminder podcast.